So about 8 months ago, back when we started, two of the major players were J3 Mobile and Sencha Touch too. And I just thought I'd give you an overview of the pros and cons here. So J3 Mobile supports a lot of different browsers. It's pretty simple and easy to pick up. It's a pretty small framework, especially compared to Sencha, which is 10 times larger. Some cons there is that it does have some performance problems, and there's not a lot that comes along with the framework. Not a lot of pre-built controls and structure to guide you in the right direction. So Sencha Touch, they've got a solid MVC architecture, build tools, and that will help you look at your application seamlessly and package it for either just as an HTML5 app if you want to run it that way, or you can package it natively. We were only using HTML5 stuff. We want to be in control of the application and not have to go through a Google process if we need to get an object out or something like that. So something that might be interesting to you is Mac. It's WebKit only, so it will not run on Windows unless you install the browser for the WebKit.
So cross-platform means, in this sense, iOS and Android then?
Yeah.
Oh, and BlackBerry.
Yeah, but you have a BlackBerry. One of the but like I said, it's got a really steep learning curve. There's a lot of magic that goes on in Sencha, and until you start to figure out what the heck it's doing, it's a little confusing. So the basic anatomy of the Sencha Touch application, you got this core application file which contains references to all these different your models, these controllers, stores, and profiles. Profiles being different types of devices like tablets or phones. We actually won't touch on that today. I've made a list of what I think are some pretty good tutorials, books, and documentation that I wish I knew how to find when I started. So hopefully that will save somebody time in the future. And the application for a very similar app that we're going to build today is up on GitHub at the top. So,
switch over. Are you going to share that outside?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll share. And if all goes well, this is all being recorded too, so hopefully we'll post that up.
So I'm actually going to code the app live.
Like video? Well, so the presentation is being recorded on the desktop with audio and
so once you go to Sencha here and download, I've already got the SDK and the SDK tools downloaded, and I'm going to use the generate application command to actually generate an application skeleton for me. So it actually runs on supposedly runs on Windows, but we've kind of gone Mac, so
I've never tried it on Windows. Supposedly it works.
Mac is a first-class citizen. So you just tell it to generate your application, give it a name, and tell it which picture you want it in. And it will generate the skeleton for that application. Which is what just got created here. So we'll open it up in WebStorm. So just give you an overview of the basic structure and outline of what it generates for you. The SDK folder is the actual Sencha Touch SDK. Just gets copied into your project. The application, your controller model profile, stores and views. It's created. We've got this app.js, which is actually where you register each of the different components for your application. Right now, the only thing it really has is this main view. And the rest of this stuff you see here is like icons for when you add it to your home screen, or startup images if you had it added to your home screen on your phone. App.json describes your application, where the files live, and what kind of updates that you would like to SDK tools to perform when it packages your application. The packager is for when you want to package it to native apps, which we haven't done anything with, and I won't cover that today. The basic index HTML, it's got a bunch of CSS at first, and that is just to show a loading indicator, which you'll see in a second, and one script tag here, which is a script that bootstraps the application. So we get started here. So I'll show you what this application looks like. So getting started at, got a link to a decent getting started video here. We're not going to so the first thing we're going to do is I'll show you here. You open up the main view, and we're going to delete everything out of it. You see that now basically there's nothing. Oh, by the way, if I didn't mention, we're going to build a sample to-do application because everybody likes to do to-do applications or sample apps for some reason. So, so the first thing that I'll add here is a list view that lists your tasks, and we are not going to use this main view, so I'll open it. So essentially you define all your classes. Starts off with the name of your application, and then it automatically generates the namespaces for you to use or profile model controller. And where the file lives follows the folder structure is the same namespace. So that's how the fun thing. Where this view will extend the list. And give it an X type. An X type is just kind of a shortcut to the what we qualified name. And give it a configuration. So pretty much everything you add to your various classes in Sencha Touch goes into the configuration. To start off, I'm just going to add a toolbar in here, title bar, so at least we have something that shows up. We'll copy to the top. And back to the check our out. you have to do. You have to add it to the list of views. And when the application launches, well, once everything's loaded, it's going to call this launch function on the application. And that's basically where everything gets started. So what they were previously doing was creating that main view and adding it to the viewport. And what the viewport is kind of just this big canvas where you could throw lots of views on. And then when you want to display one of them, you'll say, hey, set this as the active item, and it'll put that into view. Go ahead and create it here. We're going to do it as a variable later. And add it to So here's one bug, actually. See how the test is cut up. There's a bug when you run it in Chrome. So if we put the title like here. Okay. So we've got an empty list here. And now what we need is a way to actually create tasks so we can get into this list. So I'm going to create a form here, their view. There's lots of different base types of views that you can extend from. We're going to be extending from the one panel. And configuration. The items that you want to add. You probably saw me do that at the last one. In the configuration, you can have multiple nested items collected depending on the types. So here, I'm going to add another title bar. And drop it to the top again. And we'll add a text field here because starting off, we'll have a very basic edit for a task. So the label is what will show up in the field to the left of it. And for forms, the name is the same as the key on the model for the attribute. So in this case, the task title, and we'll say that this is a required field. Unfortunately, you can say it's required. It only changes the UI. It doesn't do anything for it. You have to do all of it yourself. Smart validation goes displaying a user message. Placeholder text. Yep. So we created this form. Again, you have to go back and add it here. View reviews. And then when the application launches, you'll want to create one of these too.
You mind if I ask questions?
No, go ahead.
Because I tend to ask really stupid questions.
And then you're going to fluster. Go ahead.
So why do you have to add it to that views array? Every time you add a view, what does that do?
This lets the application know which files to include, what should be loaded into your application. You'll see in a second here, above it you see a required statement. So you can require things that are not directly in one of these. The views array and the controller array, which is in there yet, and the store array are special entries in an application or special configuration options that it knows, where they live. Anything else goes into a required spot. And the app will use that information when it's packaging it. So it will go through and build a list of all the dependencies and their order, and use that information to package the application correctly. Something interesting here, depending on, so we can show you here that we have a form.
It really did work. So can you, those ext create calls, is that, I see those everywhere, is that, can you just, is that replace like, just a new statement, or like, what's the point of that?
It's a great question. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
We actually have a new. You can use a new and it works. But I'm sure it does something else. And at the moment, I don't know enough to tell you. Give you an answer.
Something to do with a loader?
We can dive off and look into it.
Fair enough.
I've wondered that myself. I haven't looked at it yet. So I've added both of these different views to the viewport. By default, it takes the first one and makes that as what shows up. So refreshing anything, we created both, added them. First one shows up pretty fast. So now we need a way to get from this list view to the form so we can create a task. So we'll add a button to the task list view. So this object here is the title bar, and I'm going to add an item to the title bar. I'm going to add a button.
How do you know what these X types are? Seems like you have them memorized, but yeah, you. Let's say I was new. Seems kind of magic-y to me.
So they've got decent documentation. Sometimes out of date. Sometimes it doesn't have everything. No. Going through the various tutorials, like some of the getting started videos here, will explain some of that. If you search for different types of, like, so let's say you put a button right here.
Can't see others.
Oh, you can't see the screen. Oh, okay. You'll see it listed by X type or by full actual name, ext, button, which would both take you to the same place.
So is X type just an alias for the full name?
Yes. And there's other things besides X types. There's something called a P type, which is used to plug in. Yeah, like for the full name. So, so something good to know if you go to look at the documentation is they have this show drop down over here. So
You can see it again.
thanks for that. In the show drop down, you can select what you want to see. So there's all these configurations, which is what you can specify in the config section. And there's methods to get at those values, and if you were to select accessor, you see the number of message from 52 to 78, so it kind of bloats this. I'll usually have that turned off, so I can just see what I'm interested in. And you'll often find in some areas that people use often, it'll have this comment thing where people have made comments on here, like, hey, this wouldn't work for me, but I found a solution over here.
That's only online for the documentation, right? Versus the SDK one you download.
Yeah, so another good thing to know is if you're trying to work offline, the SDK does have all the documentation and sample apps that come along with it. So we'll align it to the right. They have some different UI styles. So, like a confirm button is green by default, or a action button is blue. So,
Are you going to get into like skinning with any of the stuff today?
I have some of that in the one that's on GitHub, but I don't know how fast I can code it.
Especially with all my stupid questions, right?
So it comes with a bunch of pre-built-in icons. Add is a plus button you'll see, and if you actually want it to show up here, you have to mask it. Let's see, and then we'll need this later in the polish. You can use attributes of different elements and components to query them in your controller, which we'll see.
So you could look up all the available config options for the button in the SDK, or like list them under the exe button or something like that.
Yeah, so if I just search for button, and there are 59 configuration options for button. With lots of comments. I love it, CSS. Yeah. There's lots of events here. And this whole documentation system is actually open source. It's up on GitHub. You can download it and build it.
Oh, really?
As long as you use their commenting style, which is basically JS style. Yeah, it works. If your global CSS variables are mixing which buttons you use, listed here. You can filter class members. I think it makes a pretty nice documentation.
So you end up using this a lot.
Yeah, you do have to use this. Since we're here, home, getting started, etc. They've got a lot of different tutorials here. Some are better than others. There's a bunch of videos here. Again, and then a lot of sample apps. So this button should show up in the upper right. Okay. But now to click on it, there's something listening for that. So in order to get to the other view, we're going to add a controller that will listen for that button click and show the other view. So you can actually generate a few different. You can generate models and controllers with the Sencha generate command, and it adds them automatically into your app.js in the views, in the models or the controller arrays. and it creates the file for you. So it's kind of nice. I mean, I don't actually use it a lot, but so we're going to generate a controller, and the name will be test controller. So please automatically added that for me and added it in a controllers right in the application definition. So now this is where one of the places where I started to get a little confused is, okay, in a controller there's these, there's a refs object and a controls object. And I mean, the basic concept is simple. The refs is you can declare references to different components. For instance, I will need access to the task form. Okay. But there's lots of ways to query things, and if you don't know how the querying engine works, things can be very confusing and frustrating. So you can actually just put the X type in here. So we gave this an X type of view task form. And then you'll see later in the code, it will automatically generate a method that, where you can, looks like it uppercases it. And that's pretty much standard throughout Sencha. It will, it automatically generates a lot of these functions.
So the task form key will be what you use within the controller?
It's a key that it uses to auto-generate a getter.
Yeah, it auto-generates a function. Okay. And it does a lot of caching, so, you know, it's pretty quick. One thing to note is that in your UI, you want to stay away from using IDs. You know, it's a single page app.
You mean like an HTML ID?
Yeah. So, for instance, you'll see here, I'll show you right here with the button. So we just added that button, right? So the button, and it had an action of add task. So you can, this will actually find that button now. You know, normally in your web development, you probably just put an ID on something and want to query it. The problem is if you were to ever get two of these on the page, you can't have two pages with the same ID. It's not going well. In fact, Sencha kind of doesn't like it when you use IDs for things, and we had a hard time with that. So we made the transition to not using it.
How would you ever get two of the same ID? Wouldn't you just not use it twice?
Well, so in a very small application like this, probably not going to have a problem. But as it gets bigger, you know, you're going to have lots of views, and it would be easy for someone to mistakenly use the same ID in two different places. Or if you had a shared control that you put an ID on, and then you use it in two different places, you know, you screw up your done.
I can think of a couple of examples, like you have two different forms, each with a submit button. You might be inclined to call it, give it an ID of submit button.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a single page app. That's the problem.
Yeah, basically. Okay. And behind the scenes, Sencha actually, it does create an ID for the object, but it knows that they're unique. And, so anyways, as far as references go, you could add a reference to this button up here. So I could have a add task button and put that same, you know, button action text, and then instead of putting the text down here like this, you know, I could use the name, like if it's task form, I could put task form here. It does the same thing. So when somebody taps this button, we're going to want to call a function here at task. The functions get added outside of your configuration section.
So the ref section's used to basically get references to elements or controls in the views versus what's the control controls to use to,
Yeah.
to wire up events
Good question.
for those?
The ref section basically just for declaring references to various things. So they can be controls, they can be views, anything that's queryable through the component query mechanism they have. And Sean basically said it. In the control section is where you declare all of your event handlers in your control. Now, you don't have to do them there. Sometimes you may want to do them at a later point in time after something's already happened. But in general, that's where we put them. So, we'll grab this form. Like I said, it creates a function for you, and then you'll grab a hold of the viewport I mentioned earlier and set the active item.
Viewport's just like a singleton for the app.
Correct. Like if you guys have ever written games, you know, you'll have like an off-screen buffer where you render stuff and then swap them out. So it's similar to that. In a more complicated application, you probably won't have everything in the viewport at once because it'll slow down the DOM. It's just too much stuff. But it's something like this. It's totally fine to just have them living around the whole time. So now we refresh the app again and click on the button that takes us to the form. So I made a script for myself, but I've done this several times, and so I'm kind of don't need this script as much as I thought. So generating a model, like I said, it'll generate a controller and a model for you. So now that we're at the form, we want to be able to create a task where we're going to need a model to store that data. So we generate a model with a name of task model. And the fields title string. So basically, I don't know if you guys can read it, but it's the name of the field and a type, and you don't have to give them a type. In certain cases, it is.
So that's going to have a task model class, and then those are the fields that are going to be in it.
Correct.
Kind of like a big scaffold.
Yeah. And again, it has to do the model selection. There's a couple things we'll have to add here. One is, so unless you're going to generate your own IDs, like in our app, we generate the IDs on the server. But here, we're going to end up just using local storage for these tasks. So they have a have a mechanism here that will create GUIDs for new models. So in addition to what it's already done, we're going to give some of the default values. So type will be empty string.
Do you know what it would default to otherwise? The string? Is it undefined or is it null? Or?
I forget if it's null or default today, and Dawn doesn't need anything except the default value of false. Straight attached is probably not that. All right. Now, we're also going to need a store. And a store works hand in hand with a proxy in Sencha. So a store defines, has some basic properties on it about, you can give it an ID and tell it whether it should load automatically or sync with its proxy automatically. You tell it what model model it's working with, and then the proxy is where you declare whether you're communicating with a server or you're putting it to local storage. So the one that we're going to create, we're just going to put in local storage. Man, time flies. I'm going to copy some of the code in as we go that I have here, so I like that. We can get a lot faster. Maybe I'll do the speed up a little bit. I've got the same map I wrote earlier today, and I'm going to copy some of this in here and I'll just explain it to you. So, store ID needs an ID. I'll show you how that's used in a bit in the browser. Proxy, like I said, is local storage. You also specify grouping and sorting in the store, which honestly to me seems a little weird, but that's how it works. So like this grouping will be used, the grouping and sorting will be used by the list view that we have.
So store, is it kind of like a repository for your data? Or
Yeah.
And then the proxy is...
Well, you know, there's a really good image in the book that explains, in one of the books I recommend that explains stores and proxies. So it's kind of the basic structure, and the store uses a proxy as a configuration. Say where it should go.
So proxy could load data from local storage like you have here, or it could load it from, like, I guess, like a REST AJAX type call, or I don't know, something
And now,
else.
what the store gives you is, so like if I show you the documentation for a store, you get all kinds of, so like let's say that you wanted to, it gives you ways to query the records that are in that store via the proxy. You can submit this earlier. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. So it gives you capabilities like, you know, since the last time when you have if you don't have auto sync turned on, you can get records that have been modified but not synced yet, or records that were removed, and then it will push everything. It has the capability to take all those changes and batch them and put them to the either local storage or the server.
So it holds onto your records while they operate.
Yeah. Okay. So we created the store. I'm going to go to that model. Look at everything. I'll add a couple things to the list here. So what's new here is I declared the store that we want the list view of the items from and gave it a template for the items. It's just going to show the title. They actually have some really nice capabilities for templates. This is the absolutely most basic thing to do with a template. You can have actual logic in your templates. You can declare functions to be used with it, and you can use functions external. If you create an ext template, it gets compiled into a function. So they're actually pretty fast.
So like mustache or something?
I have an example of a compiled template somewhere. I was showing it to Adam earlier. But I'm trying to see it. Considering what time it is, I'm going to switch over to this other version. It's not going as fast as I wanted it to, and I will walk you through it. Or about the one that I'm taking. So there's a couple other things that I'd like to show you guys. So this one's been styled a bit now. So if there's nothing in the list here, it'll prompt you. You can add a task, give it a description, etc. They've got a date picker.
Can see half of that on the screen.
And there's a lot of them.
Oh, it's better.
So this one here has got a back button. If you wanted to not do the operation, you can save your task. They're grouped by day, so let's say I add another one on a different day. They'll be grouped as such. There's built-in capabilities to like have an index bar on the right, like in your contacts if you had a ton of them. Here, if you now, if we were to click on one of these, we can actually edit it or delete it. We've got conditional logic and the controller to handle that. So, the meat of it here, I think, is in the controller. So we've got, references for the various buttons that you use, and then we are capturing several events here. So whether you want to add a task or yeah, so if you tap on an item in the view, it's an item tap event, and it actually passes you the actual record along with the index and other information. So we just pull the task out of there and tell it to show the task form. We created a function in here that will display the task form. Grab the form, save the task off into the controller itself, set the delete button visibility, populate the form with the values, and set the form as the active item. Once you do that, so there's one trick on the form, and that is that there's a hidden field in here for the ID of the record. So it would be really nice if you could, in my opinion, they don't have a really good way to take data and sync it with a model. So you can set the data of a model, but it sets all the data. You can't just apply a subset of data to a model. So here, adding a hidden field with the ID will make it really easy to just pull all the data out of the form and apply it to your task, and everything's good. So that's what you do with the controller. When you go to save task, we grab all earlier I mentioned how we have to do validation ourselves. In this case, I've done it directly in control instead of adding a validation to the model. In this case, it didn't really add much time to do that. And it will show you a message box complaining and not letting you save. Once we get beyond that, we check to see if the task actually exists in the store. Sorry. We get the task and then see if it's a new task in it.
How do you know if it's a new task or not?
Well, if you pass me crap, like null, undefined, or whatever, it's a new task. Or if it doesn't exist in the store. So in that case, we will create a task from the form values. The form values is just a plain JavaScript object, and then add it to the store. Otherwise, we just set the data, and then we send you back the list once you get it. Send you back the list with the easy as just something we did earlier, where you said you had to write into the list. Not too much else. It's pretty basic. So a couple things here. I'll open the browser and show you. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with the debugging tools, but if I reload this, you can see the resources. So like, you can see what's in local storage, for instance. So that tab store key, the key to the store itself with the IDs for all the records, and then here's each of the records. What you see here actually is from the application when it's packaged. I'm actually going to delete those. And you actually could come in here and delete one of the tasks. Right? So if you don't want to do your homework, you can delete that one, refresh it, the whole book's done. Actually, I never tried that before. Yeah, you're right, it is. It's like, hey, there's nothing in there for that ID. Okay. So this app here is running development mode. It's kind of interesting how this works, actually. In that index.html file that I showed you earlier, there's this script tag with an ID called microloader, and it's using the development loader. Well, what happens is, when I load this app, it actually makes 207 requests. And, yeah, that's pretty bad for a user. So,
Why does it make so many requests?
well, it makes it really easy. It makes it a lot easier to debug because, I get each file individually, the code's not minified or anything. But
So request every single JavaScript file you have for your app,
correct.
even from the SDK separately.
Yeah. In this app, I actually already fixed all the warnings, but something that I was going to show you for one of the other apps was when you load this app, you'll see that there's a bunch of warnings in here. So the framework does a pretty good job of telling you, hey, wait a minute, the app might work here in development mode, but it's not going to work when you try to package it. So it is actually synchronously loading these on demand because I haven't specified that they're required. So that's all been fixed in this other application. Which
What do you mean by package?
So I'm going to show you what a package version looks like. You run the package command. Which I did copy over here. Yes. Make sure one thing is. Okay. So this one's already been packaged. When you do packaging, this is part of the SDK that you install. You from within your application. And run the package command. Build your application and you tell it what type. There's also a testing one, which there's 3 different loaders. So it concatenates and minifies all the scripts and generates a manifest file for you based on what you've entered in your app.json file. And now if we look at that, let's see. Oh, sorry, wrong place. So it made very few requests. And if we look and see where this information is, it's actually all been put in your local storage. It got really long IDs to make sure, not sure that they're unique, but here's our app.js, our app.json, our CSS, and the entire Sencha Touch framework itself. Something interesting that they have implemented that I don't trust enough yet to use is a partial update. So it keeps an archive of old builds of your application. And when you produce a new build, it will generate a delta. And so let's say, you've only changed a couple lines in your code. It will say, hey, between index, 97, 130, replace it with this block of code so you don't have to download the entire application again, which is a nice benefit because the framework's quite heavy. 300K doesn't sound like a lot, but when you download it over a 4 3G connection in Little Seattle, it's kind of so, something else that I didn't get to, okay, I'll show you. Does anybody have any questions about what I've shown? Because, there's just so many details that you could go into about various aspects of this, but this is such a high level.
Where's the syntax for querying, like in the controller? Where did you learn that? Like the button action equals that?
That's a great question. So there actually is a link to it in the slide deck because I didn't that one look there and stuff. I can't use that easy. It's similar to CSS. If you look for DOM queries,
It's specific to Sencha.
yeah. It looks very similar, but some of it is specific to Sencha. You can use any of these in the controller or in references or the controls block and the controller, and you can also use these if you're just doing a component query. You can also use X types, which are interesting. And you can even put functions in your component queries, so you can get pretty complicated.
So I know you had that one that was like action, that button, and then action equals something.
Right.
Like, where is that on the actual button itself? Is something declared on the button, or?
It's a good question. It's interesting. If you look at the DOM, you will not find that anywhere. It's not on the DOM. It is,
So the component queries don't actually create a DOM like jQuery does.
right. Yeah.
What do they query?
They have an internal cache of what everything is, and they actually do a lot of it by ID. And as you look them up the first time, it will cache that. So the next time you ask for it, you immediately get it. That was one of the problems that we ran into initially, was the caching of items. Something that they recommend that you do not do is like try to go into the DOM and do things yourself. Add your own event handlers or manipulate the DOM. They recommend that you do it through the framework, because once you circumvent it, you kind of hampered what the framework can do for you. You're not aware of those changes.
So the DOM gets out of sync with whatever Sencha thinks is on the DOM. Can I see that button declaration you had before in the view?
Yeah, do you want to see it in the HTML? Or,
No.
maybe both have buttons.
Okay, so there's action right there. And that's what you were querying on?
And, so here's the interesting thing, right? It's like you'll look for, let's say you go look at a button. You look at configs. There's no action config, right? This is just something that I added. So, I can...
What do you mean you just added?
You added action.
Right, like it's not listed in the configs, right? So, you're trying to figure out what you can configure and how it can be used, and this information isn't just sitting around the documentation waiting for you.
So the action could just be named foo?
Okay, let's try that. It was add tax, right?
Yeah. That's the package one.
Oh. And name it foo. Whatever you want. So, interesting. I don't know how much you guys have worked with local storage or the app cache. Stay away from the app cache unless you're putting something in there that is really never going to change. Unless you have questions, I won't go into a lot of details, but there's a good article called App Cache Douchebag.
What kind of stuff goes into the app cache?
Well, you can put whatever you want into it.
Okay. So it's like the local storage.
No, it's not. It's different than local storage.
I just say it has to obey like regular HTTP caching rules and things like that as well on top of it.
So
There's a bunch of problems with it.
The stuff that ends up in the app cache is based on your cache manifest file. So the only thing right now that ends up in there is the index HTML. At least for this application. For our case, we have a couple more things. We have some images.
So you put like images in there. The app cache.
Yeah. Sencha uses Compass and SAS for their styling, and they actually have a pretty broad. They've done a good job of having a lot of nice styles out of the box. You can make an app that looks professional, and it's easy to customize. They've got so previously the app that you were looking at was like blue and all this stuff, and I changed a lot about the application with just a very small changes. So I didn't show you the resources. This is where you got all your stats. So couple base colors. These are global variables for Sencha, CSS, and a couple things for buttons and lists. And then gave a red color for a new UI style that I created called Warm for the delete button. So this is what you get by default. If you want to decrease the size of the CSS, you can comment on anything you don't need. You can exclude all of the icons and just include exactly what you're using, so you can have the smallest application possible.
So, for instance, if you were using like their message box control, you could remove that Sencha message box.
Yeah, like we're not using a form or index bar or toolbar forms.
But you have to do that all manually. Kind of remember to do that, right?
Like
they don't manage, like they don't know that you're
right,
using it or not from your
no,
JavaScript code.
But it's pretty obvious if you exclude something that you're using and you go to look at your app and it's going to look terrible, and then you're going to know why. The message box here, how to reply.
So you take out the message box, see that's what it looks like.
Now I have to rebuild it, so I'll do that. So you have to install the Compass gem.
Let's see.
Stuff in the background. You can actually just have a Compass watch and make changes. As you make changes, it will detect them and automatically compile your CSS. So, yeah, Sean, we can see it again, huh?
Okay.
Still works. Yeah, I mean, if you took all the style out. So, and you probably noticed every time I refresh this app, it goes back to the task list, and that's not something that you have to live with. You can add routes. But once you get to using routes, things do become a little more difficult. But yeah, I think it's a better app. Unless you're packaging the app natively, you can't keep people from leaving it. So if someone hits the back button in your application, and it's just a single-page app, and you didn't use routes to use the history along the way, it's going to take that out of the app. And unless you package it natively, you can't detect that it's not programming. So,
what does a route look like?
So there's actually no routes in this application, but you specify routes in your controllers. In the config, there's a routes. Routes array, and you would just say what the route was, so like the default route was an empty string, and then you would just give the name of a method just like all these others. So, and then you could go to one if you wanted. You can also do more complicated things, like if you wanted to go to a particular task and be able to stay there. There's a syntax for actually having parameters in the route, and then that will get passed to this method. So in default route, it would pass the ID to that function, and then you could use that to look up the task and store it. So if you hit refresh and you're on that page, it would still show that task.
What's that look like on the browser? Is it like on the query string, the URL header bar? Change something there. Like, can you? How would it? For example, like let's say you had that task route or whatever with an ID.
I can open up our app and that would be the easiest way to show it. Or I could just say, it basically...
Yeah, just like as an example, like what would...
And then whatever the ID of it.
Do they use hashtags?
Yeah, it does for the route, right? But yeah, they
Chris is actually getting at his location.
Was it an exclamation point?
The crunch bang.
let's see.
That's also a commenting website.
Yeah.
I was on crunchbang.com.
Let's yeah. Show.
What's funny is in their documentation they have things for their
Oh, really?
yeah. And I copied and pasted a bunch of cities, so I was
Does that mean anything?
Very cool.
So you got that bug in that kind of way.
yeah. But so you can launch these in the emulator. See what we do there. Something to note is if someone has private browsing enabled, all you can check it.
What's private browsing? And what does it actually do? Just turns off local storage and cookies. And cookies.
Well, it doesn't turn off cookies. Cookies is separate.
But basically, a production Sencha Touch app that's packaged automatically stores everything, all its app.js and everything in the local storage, which obviously break it.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else to show? That's all you want to show?
Any other
You
questions?
guys have any questions?
Not really.
I know you understand it all.
No, I just I let you believe.
So I got a extremely basic question. So I get reflection clients, like the people that have done object-oriented JavaScript. I'm seeing .js here. So is the work being done here on object-oriented JavaScript?
Yeah.
Is that same as jQuery mobile as well?
There's
You know-
nothing stopping you from writing
Right.
horrible JavaScript that's not object-oriented or well-factored or formed in any of these frameworks. Sencha Touch provides you kind of a MVC framework that kind of puts in place some guidelines on like how to structure, like here's your views, and everything's going to be markup and templates. Here's your controllers, have your logic, and here's your models that have all your data. So it kind of guide you down the right path versus like jQuery mobile where it's just like, here's some templating type things and you can do whatever you want.
It would be well, I guess it wouldn't be hard, but it's harder to screw it up in Sencha than to create visitors.
There's a lot of conventions built into it. For sure. It definitely is hard to find, good JavaScript developers that have good, I don't know, programming skills and can write,
Yeah, if you find
well-factored code.
You send them over. They almost all fail basic phone screen.
Are you going to post the link for all this information?
Yeah, so I guess you'll have the slides up on the meetup site. Is that what?
Yeah, we'll try to post them on the meetup site, and hopefully if the video comes through, I'll post that, link that too.
And if you just go to my public repo, I put the app up there.
So are there any, for a few future meetup conversation, any areas that we very high level touched on that people would be interested in digging deeper, or different aspects about mobile like testing, or just trying to generate some ideas for maybe next time?
I can think of lots of things, but
I've got a huge list right here of things. See? To just start. Automation, unit testing, web testing, services, logging, monitoring, configuration, localization, local storage, rewriting over their code lines for Android, globalization, builds, packaging, naming conventions, test for units, the voting IDs, events, run using scene and democ. I mean, there's no end of things to talk about.
and a lot of them aren't specific to Sencha Touch, but
Yeah, I mean,
when you get down to the implementation of like trying to use it with Sencha Touch,
some of them.
there's some things that on some of these that are more difficult to do than others, or there aren't good examples on how to do.
But a lot of these are just, like, for instance, in Android, we found that, some of the phones, like John's phone, doesn't support a post, right, or put. Which one? It didn't support.
Put doesn't support the put
It
verb.
didn't support put. So,
Yeah.
we have kind of workarounds. So, we put it in the query string, telling the service stack what verb it actually is that it should be using.
There's lots of interesting bugs on Android.
Yeah,
Put it that way.
Android's a big thing, yeah. Basically.
In general.
Yeah, I mean, there's just such a wide variety of devices with different versions of software, and every manufacturer wants to customize the software a little bit.
Yeah, you get the same, Android version OS on one phone versus the next, and he's like, well, it should be the same, right? But it doesn't work on one of them, but it works on the other one. You want the same version.
And the emulators are very slow, extremely slow. I don't get it every time. Android emulators, like, man. So, we did a lot of work to get automated testing in place. And I don't know if you've ever written any, like, WebDriver tests actually trying to drive the app. It's a lot harder on a single-page app than it is on a normal app. Normally you can just wait and say, okay, you know what, the page loaded, okay, I know I'm ready to go. It doesn't work that way in a single-page app, Just because something's there doesn't mean the app's ready to actually be used. And, we've found solutions to a lot of these different problems, but, hoping to bring in some more people into the group and learn from what they've done as well.
Well, thank you for the demo. A little scary to me.
Yeah.
I get some of the stuff that's going on.
Right.
Maybe try the Sencha Touch Architect.
Yeah.
That's a good starting point, just because it's discoverable,
It's free. It's free for 30 days.
Yeah.
It's actually it's not that expensive if you did want to end up using it. It's $100 or $200.
For a year license or just for 2 years?
You know, I think it's like I'm not sure, but I think it's like a year. I think they like to, you know, everybody wants to get paid again. You know, but you know, if you get good use out of it, you know, it's good for yourself. You know, so.
There's a lot of example code out there, tutorials for it. Like in the beginning, we ripped off a lot of, you know, like, oh, how do you do this? And all this, how this app does it, and just copy and paste, you know, configuration blocks or control just to get something working before we really, you know, were that familiar with it. But yeah, I think as you said at the beginning, the learning curve's kind of steep.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you're using, you know, native DOM stuff or CS stuff you're used to already in regular web development. It's kind of like there's an abstraction layer over top of everything.
Yeah.
Here, I'll give you an example of what is difficult here.
Once you learn it, it's great because then you can, you know, you can start producing things that look pretty good rather quickly.
Yeah, so like let's say that you wanted to know what was going on with one of these events. And so let's say back to this, what we did. Again, so I want to go back to those. What did you load state in here? I just clicked one button, but look at this call center. So, you know, any system works. Come to a meetup where I said I would do it, and then I actually sat down and tried to figure it out. More than I have. It goes on and on and on and on. So it's not straightforward. Like we should say fire, do fire, fire, do fire, fire action, do fire, and then dispatch, and then it looks for everyone that wants to see it. And a lot of these things are in anonymous callbacks all over the place, and so I'm trying to keep up here it is.
Fortunately, you don't have to do it most of the time.
So,
Thanks, Chris.
Yep, thanks.
and I would appreciate